Welcome to the bonus video explaining the code that I used in the main video and my general thoughts on CodeNode versus Cognigy AI graphical interface. So first, I'm creating a new variable that I call item, and in item I store CI slots item 0. What does that mean? So CI is short for Cognigy input, and when I hover over it here, the code actually shows me what that CI input entails. These are all the objects that are usually found within a input. Part of the input, however, is also the slots. And again, I can hover over it. Slots are basically all of these standard slots that Cognigy always recognizes. So things like minutes, seconds, days of the weeks, but also the key phrases that we ourselves added to our lexica. And then item is simply the name of the tag that we gave our key phrases. So whenever the input parses a item, it will be added to the list of items. This is a list object or an array, and we are now looking for the very first item of the list. 0, not 1, because computers start counting at 0. So we're looking at index number 0, not index number 1. Index number 0 being the first item of the array. Next, I'm creating my so-called snippets. So these are again variables. I call them intro 1, outro 1, intro 2, outro 2, etc. And basically what this is the sentence that I'm going to plug my item into. At the end of the intro and the beginning of the outro, I then need to pay attention to do I have the right spacing? Is there any white space here? Maybe too little or too many. I don't want the words to be glued together, so I have to pay attention to that. And do I use the right punctuation symbols? All of that is taken care of in just these 2 lines, and then I do this again for my different replies. Next, I'm building the actual replies. What does that mean? So again, we're initializing variables, as you can see here. I call them reply 1, reply 2, and reply 3. So reply 1, I keep it simple. Since I don't need to pay attention to anything surrounding in a sentence, I just take the sentence, so the intro and the outro, and in between them, I add the dative plural form of my item. For the reply 2 and 3, I need to pay attention to the gender of the item that I'm parsing. Depending on what the item's gender is, grammatical gender, I need a different indefinite article. So I first check if my item has a data attribute called gender, which has the value M for masculine. And if that's the case, then the reply 2 and reply 3 are going to be the intro and outro plus this determiner plus the accusative singular and dative singular respectively. And I repeat that for each of the cases of my grammatical gender. So F for feminine and N for neuter. Finally, down here, I have an else condition where I'm just outputting an error to the user. This is basically just for me, for testing. If there's ever a key phrase that doesn't have a gender item, for example, this will output an error because it couldn't have found any gender. Now we're going to randomize these 3 replies that we built. So to do that, I first initialize a new variable that I call replies, and it's equal to an empty array. What does that mean? You remember I told you about the item array up here. So basically this is the same thing. It's a list of items, and the items that I'm going to add to this list are my 3 replies. And I do that by using the push command. So add to the replies list, reply 1, reply 2, reply 3. And at the end, I have an array with 3 items 0, 1, and 2, which are reply 1, reply 2, and reply 3 respectively. Then, as a next step, I use this function to determine a random integer between 0 and the maximum amount of items in the replies list. In this case, since we have 3 items, the maximum index is 2 because we count the 0. So 0, 1, or 2. That is the output of this function. And I'm storing the output of this function in the variable temp index. With a temp index, I can then query the replies list or array and tell my output action to send the user one of the 3 replies in my replies array as an output. So now you might ask yourself why I opted to do it in a code node instead of using the Cognigy graphical interface, one of their biggest selling points. So yeah, you can use it. It definitely can be done. I'm not going to say that it won't be possible at all. The main reason why I used it for the tutorial is, number one, because it's a lot easier to view all of the code at once and understand how it interplays. And secondly, I use it because my bot is multilingual in this example. If you have a single language for your bot, if it only speaks English or German, then you don't need to use a code node. You can do it just through the graphical interface. But as soon as you have multiple locales that share space, Cognigy currently only allows for one of the languages, the primary language, to dictate the structure of the flow. So when I switch to English here, you can see that all of my nodes are colorful. There's plus signs in between all of them where I can add new structure. So here I can add an if statement, for example, and then it creates this if statement. If I dictate that in this location, after the purchase item intent, I have a check for some value, something, then if I switch to German, this if node also exists. I can't delete it. It's fixed in place. I can add a localization for it. I can make it so that it only evaluates as true or only evaluates as false, so that it kind of circumvents the point of it. But that's designing around my own design. And I don't find that very elegant. So instead, I use a code node, because a code node can be localized like any other node in Cognigy, which means that I can use one type of code for my English bot. I can use a completely different code for German. And it's possible to not use code at all. I could just delete it, or not delete the node, but delete its content, and nothing would happen when the purchase item intent is triggered in German. That's why I prefer the code node. And that's it. For those of you who don't know how to code, I hope this was informative enough that you feel comfortable at least trying. And for those of you that do, that wanted to hear me talk about why I chose a code node in the first place, I hope I explained myself well enough. Thank you for watching, and let's get back to the main video.